you've seen in the news today, climate protesters in Germany have pelted a Monet with mashed potatoes. That comes 9 days after protesters in London emptied tomato soup all over Van Gogh's sunflowers at the National Gallery. They're challenging the public, these protesters, with the question, what matters more to you? What is more important for you? A painting of sunflowers or real sunflowers? And that takes you to the debate about climate change and the climate emergency in the terms of the protesters. What are these kinds of protesters actually hoping to achieve with these kinds of protests, though? Could it possibly turn the public against the protest? Could it turn the public against the cause behind the protest? Could it be counterproductive? Emma Brown is a spokesperson for Just Stop Oil, whose protesters recently made headlines with the tomato soup protest in London. Hi, Emma. Good afternoon to you.
Hi, William. Thank you for having me on today.
What is your sense, it's 9 or 10 days later, what's your sense of where the public is on this and the public's attitude so far, as you can detect it, to that style of protest?
I mean, so first of all, I just want to state our demand. Now we have your attention.
Oh, please, go for it, yeah.
Which is that the UK government should be immediately halting all new licensing for the exploration, development and production of fossil fuels in the UK. It's what every nation on earth needs to do, and we have 8 years of reserves left in the fields we already have to make that transition to clean energy. So it's really a basic demand that the UN, the International Energy Agency, basically everyone seems to support. So despite people maybe not liking our actions, I feel the majority of people understand that that's a basic necessity right now.
So that's interesting, and a very interesting way of doing that. Now that we've got your attention, let me state our demands. And that's the point of the exercise, of course, because frankly, you may not be getting interviewed unless these protests happen across the media. You do a protest like this, you get a platform for an interview, and you use that to put forward not just your demands, but to make the case for those changes.
Yes, William, and also it's about putting pressure on the government as ordinary people. So I'm not, for example, a lawyer or, but the UK government has actually been found guilty. It was on the hottest day of the year that they were found guilty by the High Court of not meeting their own legally binding targets and having no credible plan to address the climate emergency. So in the face of that, what can ordinary people do? And I have a friend that's actually studying quite high level to be an environmental lawyer. And he was reading one of the most authoritative texts about international environmental law. And it went through all the various treaties and international agreements that can help us deal with climate change. But it concluded, and I quote, that none of it is of any use without sudden shocks that galvanise the public and an evangelical awakening that broadens the popular base for rapid action.
Evangelical awakening. Now, you're talking on Northern Irish radio here, Emma. Do you know what you're saying?
Apologies. Apologies.
Can I ask how far you might be prepared to go when it comes to art? Because in these cases, whether it's mashed potatoes here with the Monet or the sunflowers, Van Gogh, these paintings have glass in front of them, right? And I imagine that was significant for those groups who were doing the protest, that they would choose well-known paintings that get some attention to make the case for your cause, but also they have glass on them, so there's no damage to the actual work of art, right? That would have been significant.
I mean, my line personally and the line of the organisation is that we're non-violent, and we would define that as non-violence towards people. But I think sometimes we can get a bit too caught up in hypotheticals, would you do this, would you do that? Whereas I would sort of appeal to your listeners, like, what would you do to stop the catastrophic breakdown of life on Earth? What would you do to stop your children suffering from drought in the next sort of 5-10 years, not having enough drinking water? What would you do to make sure that we're getting the policies that we need so that we can actually survive the coming decades? And I think sometimes we're asking the wrong questions there. And I know on the BBC there's a brilliant documentary about, it's called Big Oil versus the World. And it talks about how we've been kind of stuck in a loop, really, of discussing, first it was, is climate change real? Obviously it's blooming real. And then it was, how fast do we need to take action? And that still seems to be the conversation. And even now, when young people are being driven to do these kind of outrageous actions to get some attention from the adults in the room, we're still being asked, oh, what would your next action be, rather than what are the practical steps that we need to do to address this emergency?
John would like to know, before you go, he's not the only one asking this question, who's funding your group, Just Stop Oil?
Yeah, so that is totally out there for the public to see, unlike some of these right-wing energy think tanks on Tufton Street. So we get funded by donations from the public, and we also get funding from the Climate Emergency Fund, which you can just look up. And they have a list of all their contributors. And the reason that people with money are contributing to climate action is because, similarly to Extinction Rebellion, it's shown that it's way more value for money, than investing in all these structures and organisations that aren't doing enough. Like action on the scale that we need is, a few people doing direct action actually makes a lot more impact, gets through a lot more to the public, and puts a lot more pressure on governments, unfortunately, than all the petitions and the energy that we put in on other routes for like the last decades that we've done.
Emma, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. From Just Stop Oil, Emma Brandt, their spokesperson.